Before we start, I'd like to confirm which committee members and officials are here.
I'm unmuted. Apologies, Chair. If you could just give me one moment, we've just had legal join the room, so before we start the feed, I'll just get them checked in. Apologies for that, Chair. Martin, can I just confirm the live feed is on? Thank you, Chair. Joining us for this meeting of Planning Committee are members of the Planning Committee. We have Councillor William Armitage, Jane Barry, Andrew Cooper, Peter Elliott, Mark Foster, Heather Liggett, who is substituting today for Councillor Carol Huckabee, Mo Potts, Alan Powell, Tracy Reeder, Kathy Rouse, Diana Ruff, yourself, the Chair of the Planning Committee, and Ros Shipman. Also with us today, we have Councillor Pat Ancliffe, who is observing this meeting, Richard Purcell, who is the Head of Planning, members of the planning team, members of the governance team supporting the meeting, and Jean Fielding from Legal, as well as members of the public who have registered to speak for this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As you all know, we have a protocol in place for meetings in this virtual way, which I would now like the meeting facilitator to read out.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a reminder to all members to dress and behave as you would do if we were in person in the council chamber in accordance with the council's adopted virtual meeting etiquette. Please be aware that this meeting is recorded and it is being live streamed. Please could you speak through the chair, remaining muted when not invited to speak. And if you do wish to indicate to speak, you can either raise your hand or write speak in the chat bar, and we will make sure that the chair is able to see that. If the chair is unable to see your indication to speak, the team today will be assisting her in order to be able to do that. When you speak, if you would kindly introduce yourself and state the ward in which you represent. We'll be conducting voting today on roll call for each application. Please be mindful of your home surroundings and appear alone always when on camera, and keep yourself on camera at all times where possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 1 on today's agenda is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. There are 2 apologies received today, one from Councillor Jackie Ridgway and the other from Councillor Carol Huckabee, who is substituted today by Councillor Heather Liggett.
Thank you. And I take it from everyone's attendance there aren't any other apologies.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. The second item is declaration of interest. Have any been read? Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosure through new interest and or other interests not already on their register of interests in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Have we received any declaration of interest?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Do any members have any interest to declare at this present point in time?
No indications from members, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. As you know, the minutes of our meeting held on Tuesday the 9th of February 2020. Are we all happy that they are a correct record?
Yeah, move them, Chair. I'll second them, Chair.
Thank you. All those in favour?
Chair, I just wanted to speak before they were moved.
Okay, Tracy, carry on.
Am I all right to? Yeah.
Yep, feel free.
It was just with regards to the Ridgway application, sort of page 9, page 10 of the report. Chair, I know we don't keep a verbatim minutes. I'm aware of that, but I just felt, obviously reading over it, that they're just sort of too generic. And obviously I had raised concerns, and obviously I believe Councillor Cooper had also raised concerns about this application going against officers' recommendations. I can't speak for Councillor Cooper, but certainly for myself, I would have preferred my concerns to have been sort of noted a bit more in there into the report. So I'm just asking, Chair, would I be able to have my concerns recorded in those minutes, please?
I think that I can't see a problem with that. Alan,
I think what we would do in these circumstances, Chair, is to say that the minutes were approved subject to clarification that Councillor Reader had expressed these concerns about the Ridgeway application.
thank you. Are you happy with that, Councillor Reader? Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll have all those in favour. Go back to that now. Fine, thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That moves us on to the main business of today. As you can see, we only have 2 applications, each of which has its own report, marked as item 4 and 5. I am happy with this and intend to consider them in that order. However, before we do this, I would like the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers and the public who are watching on YouTube how they will be dealt with.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. We will consider the 2 applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplement has been published on the Council's website, and the link has been sent to committee members. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation, setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. The screen showing this presentation will be shared with those attending the meeting. They can also be seen on the Council's website through its YouTube channel. Following on from this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views using this conferencing facility. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of a speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points which they have made. When we have heard from all the speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by the committee and determination by a vote. A note for speakers. Once the application you've come to speak on has been dealt with, you may leave the virtual meeting room. If you choose to remain, then please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You will not be allowed to participate further in the meeting from that point. Now, as you are aware, this meeting is being live streamed. The Council will make a recording for the purpose of preparing the minutes. Once the minutes have been approved by the committee, then this recording will be deleted. Please note that others may also record the live stream from the internet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the first application, which is item 4, and this is NED/20/00833/FLH. This is the retention of an existing route line to 250 mill higher than approved planning application, 18/0009/FLH, and the relocation of an office studio in the front garden at Brereton Main Road, Cutthorpe. In line of our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning officers to tell us about any late comments, reports that have been produced, and for the planning manager to give a brief presentation showing us photos of the plans on site. The meeting facilitator will share the presentation on screen. I might find it difficult to see anybody and everybody, therefore I will allow the officers to complete their presentation first. I ask members to reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end of the presentation. There's plenty of time for any questions later. Thank you. Richard, are you leading on this one?
Good afternoon, Chair. Yes, I'll take the lead on this one. So you see this application on the screen here for the proposal to increase the roof line of the extensions and changes to this property by 250 mil, and also to site an office pod in close to the front boundary of the site. So this is the site on the corner in Cutthorpe, and the proposal has, which I'll go through the history shortly, but the extensions are obviously to the house around here, and the office pod is moving from this point here down to the front corner of the site. So the main changes, the main issue is the difference you'll see here. So we have the difference being the ground level there, or the floor level on the ground floor, and as the development has taken place, there have been various changes along the way due to a number of factors, and I'll go through what those are later when I go through the planning history. But the issue for today is the difference that this 250 mil makes in terms of residential amenity and the appearance in the street scene. So the planning history is that early in 2018, this was the scheme that was approved, and you'll see that we have basically roof lights, Velux windows in the roof there, and when it comes to the first floor balcony area, this is the screening arrangement we have here. Also slightly different changes to the fenestrations. Later in 2018, the scheme came forward with the with dormer windows in the roof and a higher wall for screening on that first floor balcony. Later, as will be explained, I'm sure, in full by the agent later, the dormer windows, which were where the roof, the ridge of the dormers ran into the plane of the roof, the dormer windows were approved, again, retrospectively, so that the ridge ran into the ridge of the roof. So all these are matters that have been approved. And so the only issue relating to today's application in relation to the house is the additional 250 millimeters of height. So that's as we see the scheme is finished. And that's as we see it with the this patio area here is roughly the area where the office pod previously stood. This is the area down the left-hand side of the house, and showing the closest proximity to the neighbouring house. And that's it looking from the other direction. You can just see in the top left of this the grille of the open edge of the first floor balcony, which you just see there at the back. The office pod, excuse me, you see here, and on the right hand side here is the the boundary to the road. A bit closer, and this on the left-hand side is the boundary to the large house and large grounds on the other side of the house. Looking at that pod from the street, you can just about see the roof and the building through the trees there. You can just see the roof and the end of the building there. So just looking up at the street scene, this is the next few pictures you'll see are taken from the road along here. So this is the house with the finished views. You can see quite a large house in the background there, which is the other neighbour on the other side. You can see clearly there the ridge of the dormers going into the ridge of the house. And the question here is whether the extra course, to all intents and purposes, of the stone there, plus a little bit more, about 5 centimetres more, really would make a difference of the area or to residential amenity. From this view, you can see the roof against the backcloth of the house behind, and similarly so there and there. So the application was called to committee by the ward councillor, Councillor Thacker, so that you could view, so the members could view the situation in relation to the appearance of the pod. And you'll see that from the representations made, there's no objections to the pod in causing harm to residential amenity or to the street scene. And the other issue, as I say, is the one of whether the building at 250 mil higher causes any harm to planning interests. Let's finish the presentation.
Thank you, Richard. I'm now going to invite speakers to speak. As the clerk explained, they will each have 3 minutes to go over their points. They will be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised. But remember, your questions should only relate to the points which have already been made. If the technology fails us, we have asked them to send us in advance a written statement of their comments. Those that we have received have been included in the agenda supplement. I have 2 speakers to my knowledge on this application, and the first one is an objector, John Robinson. Mr. Robinson, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I've had a lot of experience in dealing with planning applications, receiving many briefing papers to be studied. Something I've experienced some time ago as a member of the Derbyshire County Council Planning Committee. I therefore intend to emphasise certain salient points to assist you on reaching your decision. I spent time in studying the Ministry of Housing's Planning Act. Definitions from the Act, I will refer to enforcement, and when there has been a breach of planning control, defined as carrying out a development without the required planning permission. Effective enforcement is important to, 1, tackle breaches of planning control which would otherwise have an acceptable impact on the amenity of the area. 2, maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. 3, help ensure the public acceptance of the decision-making process is maintained. Now for some facts. Firstly, Evidence showed Betron had been built higher than approved. After many weeks of letters, meetings, submission of photographic evidence disputed by the applicant's agent, finally, on August the 15th of 2019, I received a letter from the head of planning that the height to the eaves was higher than approved plans, corroborating our original claim, thus a breach of planning control. Secondly, there are on record 14 complaints and objections recorded from nearby neighbours, a petition of over 100 signatures stating alterations were detrimental to the neighbours and did not sit well within the village landscape. Part of the parish council's letter of objection, which I hope you have read, states it particularly irks because other nearby residents have had applications refused where they have sought approval to raise their roof height. The council is most concerned that this application is allowed. It will set a dangerous precedent. This allows applicants to ride roughshod over planning rules and regulations. Time and time again, whatever comes in these objections, it is the apparent inconsistency of the department, particularly in regard to roof height. Thirdly, I would like to point out that the council has precedent in requiring reconstructions. This was the case some years ago at
30 seconds remain.
Wildday Green, Barlow. I conclude, if you approve this application, ask yourselves, are we being consistent? Are we meeting the minister's recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Are there any questions for the speaker? I can't.
No questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Next speaker for this application is the agent, Anthony Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, I can see you on screen. Are you ready? 3 minutes when you are.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This application is to consider two issues: the minimal increase in the property ridge height and the retention of a home office pod situated in the front domestic garden area. The property has the benefit of planning consents to raise the roof height to create a first floor extension, along with a further consent to form dormer windows in the roof space. The issue is whether the raising of the ridge height by 250 millimetres has a detrimental effect on the location and neighbouring properties. The roof design is of a hip construction which reduces the overall impact and results in a short length of ridge which has been raised by 250 millimetres above the original consented scheme. There have been complaints that neighbouring properties in the past have been refused permission to raise the height of their dwellings. However, times and policies change, and permitted development legislation now encourages the raising of dwellings to maximise accommodation without utilising further land. Brampton Parish Council have raised an objection on the basis they do not understand how it has finished 250 millimetres higher than approved. We provided a detailed section and explanation which clearly sets out the series of events which resulted in incremental increases through the stages of construction, accumulating in the overall increase of 250 millimetres. This is documented in full in the committee report. There's never been any intention to ride roughshod or break rules and regulations as insinuated. All changes to the building have been the subject of planning applications and subsequent approvals. This minor increase in height due to construction practicalities was not carried out to benefit the applicant and presents no real increased detriment to other properties. The newly constructed dwelling adjacent to the subject property has a ridge height higher than the applicant's. It is agreed by planning officers that there will be a barely perceptive impact, very difficult to note any meaningful change, and the proposal has no unacceptable impact on the character of the area. The other subject for consideration is the home office situated in the garden. The office has been present in the front garden for a number of years prior to the property being purchased by the applicant 3 years ago. Working from home, particularly 12 months, is strongly encouraged. The office will be limited to use only by the occupants of the dwelling. The applicant has repositioned it in a location which is concealed in the fork of two mature hedgerows. Given the fact that it has remained in the front garden for a number of years without issue, the applicant was genuinely unaware that the resiting of it would require a planning consent.
30 seconds remain.
Albeit situated closer to the highway, it presents no real impact on the character of the area, and the bordering hedgerows are mature and are to be retained. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr Jenkins? Councillor Elliott, Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that another property has got a ridge height higher than Bettron. Which property would that be, sir?
That's the one that's situated, looking at Bettron from the road, the property to the right, the newly built property right on the corner, that ridge.
Number 52.
That's right, that
Yeah,
property.
I think you'd probably agree with me that that's in a much more elevated position, so its ridge height is likely to be higher.
Well, then it's elevated, then the ridge height is higher, yes, so it's elevated, so it forms the backcloth, as you could clearly see from the photograph, so that I'd have to, obviously, if the land is higher, the ridge is higher, yeah. Can't remember which about.
Thank you.
Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to, I mean, you're given all the reasons why the ridge height is higher and all the rest of it. I mean, surely as an agent and the architect as well should have realised this when you were actually building it, and he could have then come to us and said, "We've got a problem here. Stop the building," and because we have to increase the ridge height. I mean, I presume you're an educated person, and you would have realised that the ridge height was going to be higher than you'd already got planning permission. Would I be right?
Well, no, these were all, as I said, incremental increases. There was not one issue there. There was, we did want the property to be refaced in natural stone, which was a coursing issue. And these are things of 75 mil here, 50 mil there. I think with planning drawings and then leading on to construction drawings, I think there will always be some practicalities. And I think if every building was checked to that degree, it was very difficult for them to be at exactly the level as shown on planning drawings. The incremental increases were barely noticeable at the time, and certain construction issues required stronger, thicker materials, floor joists, the roof trusses, which are designed, to later stage of the building regulation process. So we genuinely were not aware that the ridge height was any higher until it was checked electronically, and I get very difficult to look at a ridge height and judge that from the ground that's 250 mil higher, with all respect. I don't think that's possible.
Yes, but if I could come back to you, I mean, surely you realise when you were actually taking the roof off a bungalow that the actual spans had to be far deeper to carry the weight. And, I would have thought that at that point, you should have realised that the whole lot was going to be much higher. And personally, I think it's negligent on behalf of all of the team concerned that you never noticed this. All right, you've got increments, but building regulations are building regulations, and they're the same regulations that you had before.
Yeah, I would accept that, but these are increases which, as I say, are part of the construction process. We're not there every minute of the day to see that in effect. We submit the drawings, and they are built according to those drawings. What's happened on site is they have made changes, accepted small changes, but incrementally resulting in the 250 mil. So we certainly obtained the planning consent, obtained the building regs consent, but we don't have the control over everything on site that happens. And these were genuine issues which made the project work better, and the overall result is an increase of 250 mil. We're not disputing that. That's how the thing is finished up practically. And I think probably a major issue is that the type of roof is, it's not a gabled roof where you've got an excessive ridge length. It's a hipped roof, which impacts less on adjacent properties and results in a very short ridge line, which is where the increment is.
Well, I don't really accept what you're saying as such. Perhaps you can explain how the pod was moved without permission. I mean, did it just sort of spring up later down across the paddock to where it is at the moment? I mean, why was that moved? It seemed odd.
Well, because the owner of the property moved it into what he considered to be a better position. It's tucked away, can't be seen. We personally, as agents, were not responsible for that. That was what the owner of the property moved the pod. It's an existing pod that had been there a long time, and they genuinely were not aware that there was any consent required to re-site that office pod. So we had no involvement in that whatsoever. That's something the owner of the property took upon himself to move it to a position which he felt was more discreet.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rouse, then Councillor Foster.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins. Just a quick question, really. For me, I'm just wondering why didn't you put the dormer windows in the plane of the roof rather than going up to the ridge?
Why didn't we?
In the plane of the roof?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't normally see a dormer on a ridge, would you? It's normally below that ridge.
It was the sill height on the dormers were very low. The client asked us if he could lift those up. It's a playroom, he's got young children, and he asked if we could lift the sill height. Now, lifting the sill height doesn't have any real impact on the visual impact from it. The visual impact is from the eye line. And the client asked us if that was possible, and we made the application on the basis that he was concerned about the height of the sill, and that was approved. So that really was the reason.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Mark Foster, member for Colaston. Hello, Mr. Jenkins. Just a bit of clarity for me, please. We've got the 250 mil, which is the ridge height, and then earlier we had our officer mention one course. I'm not sure if that's a type of stone course or not. I'm not sure. So we've got the 250 mil for the ridge height. If that's also at the gutter height where the pan sits, that 250 mil as well. Yeah, that keeps the same angle of the roof. So is it still there? Because that would be 3 course of bricks and not 1 course of bricks. It's only a small point, but just a bit of clarity on that, whether it's at the final course or it's also the 250 at the ridge height as well, please.
Well, yeah, there's a course of stone which is actually 150, and then there's a, as I said, an incremental increase in the final design of the roof trusses, which are an engineered truss, and I think there's probably something like 75 mil increase in those, and 50 mil increase when at the first floor levels where the new joists were, the deeper joists were inserted. So it's an addition of all those different heights that total 250, which is why we commissioned the electronic survey to actually measure exactly what that ridge height came out at, and that was an independent survey. The floor level has not changed, obviously, because that was the old bungalow floor level. So we're able to check from the existing floor level to the ridge height on a GPS survey, and that's where the increase is.
And further to that, Mr. Jenkins, no, I understand it. Now I've had it explained. So further to that, What about the top floor level? So that the upper floor of the building, is that any higher than the original plans?
The wall plate level will be
The floor level.
the floor level will be approximately 100 millimetre, 150 maximum higher at the floor level, because the bottom corner of the truss is slightly deeper. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's a.
Yeah, it would be fair to say there is a small increase in the first floor level, yeah, or the attic level, yes.
Yeah, that makes sense now, and it just points me away from it's just how it's finished up, because that's by design. That's how it looks to me anyway. So, but thanks for that, Mr. Jenkins.
Okay.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Potts?
Thank you, Chair. Mo Potts, I'm Mackillermarsh councillor, Mr. Jenkins. Hello. I just wanted to. My question relates to the siting of the pod. Looking at the pictures, that hedge looked like it was conifer all the way down. I suppose what I'm getting at here is there going to be all year round cover for that pod located so close to the pathway?
Well, it is primarily an evergreen hedge. There are some native species in there, but primarily it is an evergreen hedge. I think it would not be showing as it is at the moment at this time of year if that was not the case. So it's a substantial edge. The applicant is comfortable with that being retained and conditioned. If that needs to be conditioned for the protection, then that's not an issue at all. No, I mean they want the privacy, obviously, and it's an area of the garden which they genuinely felt was the right siting for it tucked away in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see it would be from their point of view in the house. It's the furthest point it could be, but in terms of its proximity to the highway, if that hedge wasn't there, it would be very visible. But thank you for that.
Thank you. Are there no further questions for Mr. Jenkins? Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Okay, members, we now have the opportunity to ask any questions to the planning officer. Councillor Armitage.
Thank you. Can you tell me what defines this pod? I mean, if it was a garden shed, it wouldn't need planning permission. What's the definition? Why does the pod need planning permission? Well, it doesn't look like a permanent structure. Could you enlighten me, please, on this?
Yeah, it's as permanent as it's necessary to need a permission. The reason it needs a permission in this instance is because of its proximity to the road. It's that's the reason why it needs a consent. I mean, if this was in the back garden, it would be a different set of circumstances. It is a building which will be considered as ancillary to the main dwelling. Although it's going to be used as an office, it is the office, as might well be a room in the house being used as an office. It's not going to be a separate business or a separate use in planning terms. So it only needs permission by virtue of its proximity to the highway. So
when it was in its original position, I presume then that it never had planning permission. Would I be right?
I don't think it did have any planning permission. No. How long it's been there, I don't know.
Right. So basically, it's what sort of distance are we looking at that it needs to be clear of the road?
It's from memory recalls, it's about 20 meters from the highway, but when it's in the front of the dwelling. So if you've got a very large garden, it can still be in the front of the house, provided it's more than 20 metres away from the highway. But as you see here, I mean, this is pretty much about a metre or so away from the highway boundary, so there's no question about that.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a question to Richard, please. I have to say, Richard, it is an application that I stood and spoke about, and I never really wanted it to go through as a house. I was quite happy with it as a dormer bungalow, but the application was voted through by my colleagues, and now we've got to live with it. And it has caused a lot of issues within the village. I'm the member of Cuckthorpe. And 250 mil, in fairness, now it's up, won't make a great deal of difference. And as it's been approved the whole way through, I've got nowhere to go with it. The pod is elevated from the road and it is screened from the road with the conifers. I've not really got an issue with that. I have got an issue with what it brings with it, and that's the lighting within the boundaries. I don't know if we can do anything about that because it's lit up like a Christmas tree most nights. I've had quite a few complaints about that. And similarly, the parking that it attracts every single morning, every single night, half on the path, half on the road, on a sharp bend, with people walking up and to and from school with push chairs and push bikes and all the rigmarole that goes with it. I don't know if this is minded to go through, whether or not we can condition all that, because the parking is shocking.
Okay. Well, firstly, we can't control parking on the highway through planning conditions, or even parking part on the footpath and part on the highway. What we can say is that within the curtilage of the house, you would have seen from one or two of the photographs, there is a wide drive area, large turning area, and so that there should be sufficient car parking in there for any people who are living there. But the issue, I'd say, is that this pod is, as I mentioned earlier, ancillary to the main use of this as a dwelling. If this office use is generating a lot of visitors, that starts to change the characteristic of this property as a residential property, then we'd very well need to consider whether it is a change of use to a residential and office use. But that's not the situation that's been applied for. It's not the situation that has been asked for. But it is a situation that we will, I'm sure residents will continue to monitor. And if there is a change in that characteristic, we will review that situation. But it is very much a separate situation to that is with the committee for a decision today.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, I'm going to ask the clerk to explain the next part, which is about the motions and how they go forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved, which goes against officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and to be supported by evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendation fails, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or another course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. In terms of the timings of the motions, these should be moved and seconded after the committee has heard, read and discussed the evidence before it. The chair will indicate when this point has been reached and will then invite motions to be put. When members will be reminded of this by the clerk if they wish to propose a motion before then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I shall open the floor for debate if anyone wants to lead that. Councillor Shipman?
Yeah, I must say, part of me thinks, why has it even come here? The other part of me, I'm just like, yeah, okay, we need better enforcement. We need to make sure that people are building to the specs that we've approved or previous planning committees have approved. But ultimately, the arse is 25 centimetres taller. I don't think it's going to make a significant impact if it retains the width and stuff of the roof as it is. In terms of this pod, the fact that it doesn't require planning permission if it's further away from road and it's screened from the road, for me, it's not an issue. As long as it is screened, then I don't see why we can reject this. I just think that we need to just get this passed and then move on to the next piece of business, if I'm honest with you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further? Councillor Armitage?
Yes, I mean, it's obvious to me that we've had different height increments put in all the way through, and it was finished originally, we were looking at 400 millimetres higher. Well, you know, it stands to reason that if you jack the floor up, it's going to be less. But it's gone on and on and on, being higher and higher all the way through, and it should have been seen to earlier. But anyway, that's it. We've ended up and it's maybe 10 inches higher, which is, well, basically neither here nor there. The other thing is about this pod. Now, it's bounded by a Leylandi hedge. They have limited lives, these Leylandi, and the problem is with them is they've got this moth that appears very frequently. It'll kill the hedge off very quickly with not much warning. And I would like to put a condition that they put a substantial sort of wooden thing to stop the light going through and things like that. And I would like that as a condition if we are going to pass this. I feel it's retrospective. I don't like retrospective planning applications myself, but if it were to go to appeal, I'm afraid the applicant will probably win.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barry?
Yes, Chair. I was actually just going to move officers' recommendations. Have we not got one?
Sorry,
Oh,
Chair.
I'm too early. I'm too early. Sorry about
Yes.
that.
Are there any other comments? No? Okay.
Councillor Elliott, Chair.
Oh, Councillor Elliott, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through the chair, Councillor Armitage has just said he'd like to see it screened differently with a fence or something. I personally wouldn't, because it's in an elevated position anyway. At least when it's hidden with greenery or vegetation, it is hidden and it does blend in better. There are no fences 2 and 3 and 4 metres high anywhere up that road. I take his point completely about the screening. And yes, it needs to remain screened, but not in the fashion of any more structure. Otherwise, they may as well have put the pod on the side of the wall. So that's just a side to that. But I agree with this conditioning of the screening.
Okay, go along with you on that, Peter.
Thanks, William.
Yeah, going along with that, the screening, I think a condition could be put in that it is screened by trees, whichever the trees may be, but put a condition in that it has to remain screened at all times, with a preferably trees that are native to the area rather than the Leylandi.
Okay, everybody happy with that? Nothing else to say? Well, I shall open it for motions, and having heard everything and everyone's read today and the officer's recommendations before us, what is the view of the committee on the application? I am now opening the floor for a motion. Thank you.
I'll motion to go with officer's recommendation and approve this application, but with the conditions which we've mentioned for the screening.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that, Chair, but obviously with the conditions as well, as Councillor Armitage said, and obviously with what Councillor Barry was saying about screening with trees, so keeping it very natural, and it fits in with climate change agenda as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Tracy. Richard?
Yeah, I just want to seek clarification before a resolution is passed with an additional condition relating to screening. You've seen the photographs as they are showing the pod from the street, and there is a lot of screening there already. If you are wanting to see screening there which is of an indigenous species, the way to do that would be basically to take away all the Leylandi that is in there now and to plant a hedge of an indigenous species. So for the next however many years, that pod will be seen far more obviously from the street, whilst the indigenous species are growing up to a height to be able to screen it. So you might want to give some thoughts to that. If that's what you're intending to do, that's going to be one of the consequences of that.
Richard, from what I understood from the debate, and people will correct me if I'm wrong, they're happy with the Leylandi to stay now, but should the Leylandi get diseased or be removed, they should only be replaced by natural habitation, mature shrubbery, mature trees of similar ilk, so it is screened from the road. I can see lots of heads nodding up and down, so I think I'm on the right wavelength.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. I've got the clarification for wording of such a condition then.
You can plant it in front between the pod and the Leylandi, and when they get to mature, and it'll give the hedge, the new hedge, time to grow. So if you plant it together next to the Leylandi, that'll be the best way of doing it. So there's always a hedge there.
Through the chair, that is pretty much about it. What Councillor Armitage has just said. The Leylandi right now do screen it because they've been positioned to do just that. But if that was to disappear, all you would see is the pod and the rest of the garden and the rest of the lighting that's quite offensive. So it needs to be a permanent screen. I'm all for planting in between it, plant more. I don't care which way that runs around with as you rightly say, you know, native species. But if you go up and down Cutthorpe Road, there's everything you could possibly wish to see going up and down there, from aces to everything. There's plenty of stuff up there.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're all happy with the condition that it should be native or mature, some form of natural hedging.
So it's, sorry, Chair, to approve officer recommendations subject to the additional condition that there should be always appropriate screening, which would transition to screening of natural or rather indigenous vegetation. Is that the essence of it, members?
I'm happy with that. Everybody happy with that? Yes, I see lots of nodding heads. That's fine, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
We'll move it to the vote.
Thank you, Chair and members. The vote will be conducted by roll call. If you could clearly say for, against or abstain to grant permission with the conditions discussed. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Barry.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Elliott. Councillor Elliott, for your.
Sorry, Nikki, for.
Councillor Mark Foster.
For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader,
4,
Councillor Rouse,
4,
Councillor Rough,
4,
and Councillor Shipman.
4.
Chair, that's 12-4, unanimously carried.
Thank you. We now have a motion and that's all been passed. So thank you very much for that. We'll move on to the next application. I've just lost my piece of paper. I've got that much stuff here. 1 second. Here we go. Second application is for NED/20/01137/FL. Demolition of existing buildings and conversions of existing buildings formerly used in association with livery and riding school to form single dwelling, restoration and retention of auxiliary buildings, erection of 4 new dwellings with associated landscaping, parking and access. The setting is of a listed building affecting a public right of way at Cartledge Hall Farm, Holmesfield, for Mr. Matthew Jenkins. So, okay, everybody, I'm going to open this to the planning officer. Richard, are you leading on this?
It's going to be me, myself,
Sorry,
Chair.
Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's going to be me taking you through the presentation for this one. Sorry to interrupt there. Just before commencing the presentation, I just wanted to summarise the policy context and the officer conclusions. The application site is situated partially within the Greenbelt and the Cartledge Conservation Area. The site is a former equestrian use, excuse me, and comprises previously developed land as per the definition included in the NPPF. Officers consider that the proposals would have a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt than the existing situation, particularly in visual terms. In this regard, the proposed development is not considered to comply with the defined policy exceptions to inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Officers are also of the view that the proposed detached dwellings in the southern element of the site would result in some harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area by virtue of their scale and massing. As set out in the officer report, however, it's considered that the identified harm has been reduced from that of the scheme previously refused, which members may recall from the June Planning Committee of last year. Namely, the harm has been reduced as a consequence of the revised design and scale of the proposed dwellings. As with the previous scheme, the harm identified is considered to be less than substantial in policy terms. Officers consider that despite the harm identified, the proposals would represent a comprehensive redevelopment of the entire site, refurbishing and retaining all the historic farm buildings and the dry stone boundary walls within the application site. As such, in this instance, the less than substantial harm caused by the massing and scale of the new buildings is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits arising by way of saving this important historic farm group and securing an optimum viable use in accordance with paragraph 196 of the NPPF. Moreover, the identified public benefits are considered to amount to very special circumstances that would outweigh the harm identified in Greenbelt terms. As set out in the officer report, officers are of the view that subject to conditions, there are no technical reasons that would warrant refusal of the application. On balance, in view of these considerations, officers consider that the proposal would represent an acceptable form of development in accordance with the applicable local plan and NPPF policies. If we can move on to the slides, please, Nikki, I'll run through the presentation. So the first slide shows the collection of buildings forming the application site and its surroundings. The site is broadly highlighted in yellow. To the south of the site is open countryside, and to the northwest of the site are buildings within the defined settlement of Holmesfield. Approximately 50 metres to the north of the site lies Cartledge Grange, which is a range of grade 2 listed building, beyond which lies Cartledge Hall, a grade 2 star listed building with associated grade 2 listed buildings within its grounds. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Nikki. Slide 2, so this sets out the layout plan as proposed. This illustrates the proposed new dwelling situated around an informal courtyard arrangement. The plan also shows the the existing historic farm buildings that the scheme seeks to retain by way of conversion to domestic uses, including the threshing barn to the east of the access track. As you can see this on the plan, this is the most southeasterly building on the plan. Dotted lines show the proposed footprint of the dwellings proposed under the previously refused scheme to illustrate the amendments as regards the footprint of those buildings. You might be able to just make those out on the plan for the 4 new dwellings. If we can move on to the next slide, please. This is the proposed parking arrangements for within the site. 2 spaces are earmarked for the existing farmhouse, which falls outside the application site. 3 spaces are proposed for the threshing barn, and a further 3 spaces for the dwelling adjacent to the threshing barn. 2 spaces are proposed for the dwelling to the southwestern corner of the site, and a further space is proposed for each of the semi-detached dwellings. So each of those properties would comprise 1 parking space. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Nikki. This is the elevational drawings for the proposed conversion of the threshing barn, which broadly details the external works involved in the conversion of the building to a dwelling house. Next slide, please. Again, elevational drawings, but these are for the semi-detached dwellings proposed. The dwellings would comprise natural stone walling materials with the previously applied for metal cladding treatment on upper floors omitted from the scheme. Next slide, please. This is the elevational drawing for the detached dwelling at the southwestern corner of the site. Similarly, the materials have been altered in the way described for the previous slide. And next slide, please. And similarly, elevational drawings for the detached dwelling between the 2 aforementioned properties. A subsequent plan will illustrate the extent to which these revised properties have been reduced in scale. The next slide, please. In fact, this is the slide here, which is a sectional drawing which illustrates a comparison of the scale and massing of the previously refused scheme with the revised scheme. As you can see on the plan, the areas edged in red reflect the scale and massing of the previously refused scheme. Hopefully this will assist members in understanding the alterations that have been put forward as regards this element of the scheme. The semi-detached properties, as you'll be able to see, have been reduced in width, and the detached dwellings have been reduced in height and width, as well as being repositioned. Next slide, please. So moving on to some photo montages of the site. This is looking in a southerly direction from the access track. So the existing pigsties on the left-hand side of the track would be retained as part of the scheme and used for ancillary residential purposes. The existing stone walls would be retained, as you can see throughout the site. The farm track would be resurfaced with a porous resin bonded gravel. In the centre of the image, you can clearly see the semi-detached dwellings that would be proposed. These dwellings would in effect replace the existing Dutch barn. Next slide, please. So this slide, again, it's another computer generated image, of course, and shows one of the key views into the site from the countryside to the south. The proposals show the converted threshing barn on the right-hand side of the built form. And it also shows the proposed additional dwellings within the site. As alluded to in the introduction, officers do consider that there would be some harm by virtue of the scale and massing of these buildings in Greenbelt and heritage terms. That being said, the benefits that have been identified arising from the comprehensive redevelopment of the site, including the restoration of existing buildings of merit, officers are of the view that the harm identified would be outweighed by by said benefits. Next slide, please. Again, another computer-generated image which shows the yard of the threshing barn with the detached dwellings in the background, with the ancillary building which would have been restored as intervening in between those spaces. This image hopefully provides some context in terms of how these buildings will relate to one another. Next slide, please. Moving on to photos of the application site. This photo is taken from the southern edge of the site, looking out towards the open countryside. Just on the left of that image, you can see the riding arena associated with the former equestrian use of the site. Next slide, please. Taken from a very similar spot, the next photo is looking in a northerly direction, back into the conservation area in the built form of the collection of buildings. Looking left to right, you can see the bungalow and the Dutch barn, which are earmarked for removal, and beyond that are a number of historic buildings which would be converted and repaired as part of the wider scheme. This includes a threshing barn on the right of the image, as you can see it there. Next slide, please. Again, a bit more detail on the threshing barn and some of the other historic buildings. The more utilitarian aspect of that building would be removed, leaving the historic building to be converted. Next slide, please. Again, this is the Dutch barn, which is earmarked for removal, and historic farm buildings which would be restored as part of the development proposals. Next slide, please. And a further picture of the buildings to be restored. Next slide, please. This is a view from within the application site, looking towards the existing farmhouse, which is outside the application site to the north. The land in the foreground that you can see would comprise the rear gardens for the proposed semi-detached dwellings. Next slide, please, Nikki. Again, from a similar point, just this is looking back towards the central track running through the application site. Next slide, please. And again, from a similar point within the site, looking at some of the historic farm buildings that would be restored as part of the development proposals. Next slide, please. This is the Dutch barn, which would be earmarked for removal. The semi-detached properties would broadly sit on the same a similar footprint, or in that location rather. Next slide, please. Again, this is the Dutch barn with a lean-to aspect, which will also be removed. Next slide, please. This is a view from within the application site, which hopefully gives an understanding of the character of the site with the existing buildings. This is the threshing barn, which is earmarked for conversion to a single dwelling. As you can see, it benefits from a number of openings at its principal elevation, which would be utilised in that conversion. A number of the ancillary buildings that you can see in the foreground and the timber stables would be removed as part of the application as well. Next slide, please. Another photograph from the access track looking in a southerly direction. You can just see the pigsties on the left, and again it gives you an indication of the current character of that aspect of the site. Next slide, please. A very similar picture, just taken from a few yards back from the last one, but this gives you a bigger understanding of the context of the site in this location. You've got the pigsties on the left-hand side, stone walls throughout the site. In the centre of that image, you can see the Dutch barn, which would be removed and would, as mentioned previously, be the site of the semi-detached properties roughly. Next slide, please. This site shows the gated access, this photo shows the gated access to the site on the right hand side, as you can see it, and the bridleway continuing on from the lane in the centre of the picture. Next slide, please. This photo is taken looking in a northerly direction up Cartledge Lane. You can see clearly there's dwellings on the left-hand side of the image. Grade 2 star listed hall on the right. The hall situated approximately 75 metres to the north of the access of the application site. And the final two slides that we're going to move on to show the junction of Cartledge Lane and Millfoot Lane. This particular image is looking in a northerly direction, and I think we've just moved on to the second image, which is looking to the south. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And I'm going to move on to the speakers. And we have 6 speakers for this application. We'll start with the objectors. I'll take them in the order that I have in front of me. And the first one is Maureen Turner.
Hello.
Hello, are you there? Oh, there you are. You
Yes,
have 3 minutes, Maureen, when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. We refused a planning application for virtually the same development in July 2020. And since that time, minor amendments have been made which tinker around the edges, but fail to change the fundamental policy objections. The planning officer accepts the development is contrary to Greenbelt policies. The only changes are the width of the houses. The number is the same, and while the width of some of those houses is reduced, they have been slightly increased in depth and 2 have been increased in height. The very special circumstances put forward are only to ensure the historic buildings are retained. However, planning case law requires this form of enabling development where the proposals are contrary to planning policy to be supported by financial appraisals to show that without the new housing, the development of the historic buildings is unviable. No such appraisal has been submitted. The document relates to enabling development, yet it has been ignored, and that's the documents. The historic buildings can be retained and developed as houses without the new housing, and I'm sure would comply with all your policies. The public interest can be preserved without the new housing. Car parking remains an issue to which the Highways Department have registered an objection to the shortfall. Only 11 spaces are available for 6 dwellings, some of which are unusable, and there's no visitor parking. The access to and from Millthorpe Lane is already dangerous without further development. Highways have not objected because they've been misled into thinking the equestrian centre could reopen. No such equestrian centre ever existed, as the former owner of the site has confirmed. The proposals are urban in character and are not appropriate for a village like this. The development remains contrary to Greenbelt policy, with no justifiable very special circumstances. It does not preserve or enhance the conservation area or the natural environment. The developers have lodged an appeal against the previous refusal, and if you approve this application, you will find it impossible to make a sound case to defend that appeal. You will probably end up with the scheme you have refused being allowed on that appeal. Please stick by your previous decisions. Don't be misled and refuse this application for the same reasons. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next speaker is Mike Dawson. Oh, I beg your pardon. First of all, are there any questions for Ms. Turner? Nope. Okay, moving on to Mike Dawson. Mr. Dawson, are you here?
Have you got me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes.
The first thing and most important thing that I want to state is that this proposed application is still an inappropriate overdevelopment of a conservation site. This is still an inappropriate overdevelopment of a greenbelt area. This site is within the Sheffield Greenbelt and the National Planning Policy Framework, and states very clearly, quote, inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. The buildings that are now there are not special circumstances and not needed to be saved to allow a mini housing estate to be built. We are then concerned about the weight being applied in the conclusions, which has led to a recommended conditional approval, particularly around the repeated assertions of officers that this application will somehow save existing buildings. That is a flawed framing of this application, and as local residents, we would ask that the committee disregard this assertion, for which no proof is offered, in making their final determination. The size, bulk, and height of each of these new designs will have a negative impact on the beautiful countryside. They do not blend into the greenbelt area, but actually stand out as an eyesore and a blight on the landscape. They will be a visual intrusion of this conservation area and greenbelt area. Officers have conceded in the summary that the openness of the greenbelt is not preserved by this application, and sizable buildings which are relatively conspicuous are being proposed. The officers also accept there will be harm to the local area from a visual perspective. That is contrary to the NPPF and to the local NEDDC policies. Also, the access road is not suitable for more traffic, especially with the farm traffic. It is narrow, and the junction where Cartledge Lane and Millthorpe Lane meet is an awful junction where car drivers can't see both ways unless they pull well into the road. Increased traffic will increase the likelihood of accidents and injury. If the committee takes a step back, it is clear that this application, in its size, bulk, proposed replacement, impact on greenbelt, impact on the conservation area, location and approach does not align with either the spirit or the framework rules on these important issues.
30 seconds remain.
Based on that alone, this application should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikki, I don't know why, but I've suddenly got a hand appear up on our screen about the council chamber. Not sure if you can get rid of that.
I'll have a look into that for you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Dawson? No? Thank you, Mr. Dawson. The next speaker is Maureen Greenland.
Hello. Can you see me?
Hello, yes, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, good afternoon. Last year, as you know, a very similar application to this one was unanimously rejected by councillors as being an inappropriate development of a green belt and harmful to the intrinsic character of a conservation area. Nothing has changed since then, except for very minor modifications to the proposed houses. The farm is still in a conservation area and the green belt hasn't moved. The case for very special circumstances that would allow building on the green belt is dubious and insubstantial. It's invalid because there's no evidence to support the notion that the only way to restore the historic buildings is by building new houses. Both our planning consultant, Eric Telford, and Lee Rowley MP have strongly emphasised this point. There are no financial or practical details to show how it could be achieved, or the extent of the renovations, or what the public benefits might be. Other serious objections have been glossed over in the planning officer's report. In particular, the legal status of the footpath and the implications for walkers if it became a road, the incongruous style of the proposed houses and their elevated position, the inadequate parking spaces and the lack of extra space for additional vehicles to manoeuvre and park, the dangerous blind junction on the road to and from the farm, the difficult access within the farm along a bendy single track and up an awkward slope, and the proposal for street lighting where Cartledge Lane residents have voted for darkness. The old farm is not the place for a mini suburb, complete with hedges, gravel paths, and probably trampolines and summer houses. Increased traffic is a real worry. Who knows what other further developments there might be in the future. what uses might be found for the renovated buildings. There's been no consultation with local people and no sympathy for their fears. This scheme is ill-advised and impractical. Above all, the plan to build on the green belt is unjustifiable. It has to be firmly refused, as it was before.
30 seconds remain.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No. Thank you, Dr. Green.
That's it. Yes, thank you.
That's it. You got off lightly. And the final speaker for the objectors are Thomas Greentham.
Chair, your technical issue, which you mentioned, should be resolved now.
Thank you, it is.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm here in my capacity as chairman of Holmesfield Footpaths and Bridleways Society. It is necessary to clarify and legalise the status of Footpath 26. Previous comments by walking groups have expressed concerns which have not been resolved. Historically, the route from south to north did not pass through the whole farm, but veered eastwards to meet Bridleway 53. About 4 decades ago, the previous owner, now deceased, blocked the footpath Bridleway Junction and instead allowed walkers to pass straight through the farm on the track to the northern gate. This footpath has now been signposted by the council and is frequently used as a walking route through the countryside between Cartledge and Millthorpe. Under the proposed plan, the farm track will become a hard surface road used by potential residents, visitors and service vehicles. The future use of the footpath must be discussed and considered. The legal position of the present route needs to be regularised and, if necessary, redesignated before further action is taken on the planning application. Indeed, who would buy the threshing barn when their solicitor points out that a public right-of-way goes right through the middle? I'm guessing about 20 years ago in Gosforth Valley, there was all hell let loose when it was pointed out that houses had been built on a public right-of-way. It took years to sort out, and residents were unable to sell their houses and were in fear they could be demolished. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I just have one, Mr. Greenham. Regarding footpath 26, it runs through the threshing barn if you look at the map properly. Is that correct?
Yes.
So as the barn is there, people can't walk through it now. So has it been moved officially?
The footpath has never been moved officially, no. Talking to the people at Matlock, the footpath officer, Mr. Mountain, he is aware of this anomaly, but I'm not sure he knows what to do about it. But would anyone buy the threshing barn? Hands up.
Do you know when the barn was put up? Because obviously the footpath must have been there before the barn.
Sorry, I don't know, no.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No? Thank you. We'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next speakers, and there's the agent, Carl Taylor.
Excuse me, Chair, it'll be Susan Crowley who's speaking in his absence.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Susan, are you there? Hello.
Hi, thank you.
When you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I do apologise, Carl, the applicant's landscape consultant, hasn't been able to join us today, so I'm going to be reading from his statement, and bear with me while I pick through it. In response to members' previous concerns about impact on the landscape and visual impact more broadly, the applicant commissioned the input of a landscape consultant who's prepared a landscape and visual impact assessment which has supported the planning application. And the purpose of this report really was to set out the extent to which the proposals would impact upon the landscape and visual amenity of the surrounding landscape in the village. It was put together, we must stress, following the latest national technical guidance to offer as transparent and objective a description of these potential effects as is possible. Carl would like to stress that this landscape and visual impact appraisal was developed from desktop-based research, site visits, and in discussion with related disciplines such as our heritage consultant. In terms of overall impact, Carl accepts that landscape effects can be adverse, neutral, or beneficial, but in this case, his assessment is that the change in effects are beneficial, primarily due to the removal of detracting structures, the restoration of historic buildings, and the enhancement of their settings through the removal of the detracting neighbouring structures, and through the sensitive nature of the proposals and the design of the new buildings within an urban arrangement that retains and respects the linear nature of the original farmstead and the routes through and around it. So in terms of landscape impact then, the summary is the effects are beneficial. In terms of visual impact, it's been determined that the edge of settlement location of the site, its wooded character, and the undulating nature of the topography restricts the visual envelope of it, and views are therefore often substantially filtered by layers of field trees, woodland, and hedgerows, or else blocked by existing built form. In that context, it's been decided by our landscape expert that the proposals are considered as a visual change which is beneficial, securing the visual amenity attached to the threshing barn, the cart shed, the pigsty, and other stone buildings to be retained within the farm group. It is also considered by our expert beneficial through the removal of modern and detracting elements, allowing the remaining heritage buildings to appear uncompromised. The proposed additional buildings will not interfere with views currently possible and will maintain the aspect from the public footpath network. In terms of impact on Greenbelt, the expert has concluded the proposals lie within an existing area of development where both physical and visual amenity will be contained within areas already established as developed. The purposes of
30 seconds remain.
The purposes of the Greenbelt will be protected, and the restoration of buildings and land will answer purpose 5 of said Greenbelt, encouraging the recycling and regeneration of land. In all, the conclusion is the effects are beneficial from a landscape visual impact assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Considering this was refused originally, and we've heard from residents, were the residents never considered when you've gone back to look at this new proposal?
Chair, thank you for that question. We did go out to public consultation via the parish council ahead of submitting the formal planning application, and I think we set that out in our statement in support of the submission.
That's the parish council. I'm talking about the residents that were going to have the impact on the development, the people that live closest to it.
No, we didn't make contact ahead of the planning application going in, but as far as I'm aware, they have been consulted during the planning application determination process by the case officer.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Mark Foster, member for Colaston. Hello, Mrs. Crowley. Yeah, my question is about when you spoke about the impact on the Greenbelt. When you look at what our officers have put in the report, it's still considered inappropriate development, as you probably know. And that is only acceptable if we have got the very special circumstances. Now, the very special circumstances are still, and they're only given in just one sentence in this whole report by our officers, which is public benefits by saving this important historic farm group. Now, there's no more in here about that other than that one sentence, and that was the same last July. We had no explanation on that whatsoever, and one of the objectors, Dr. Greenland, pointed out that very same fact, and I, you know, without prejudging this until I've heard all representations, I've still up to now got the same view that I had before last July, because this has not changed on this element of it. I know the scale and massing's changed, and I know the substantial harm part has changed because the officers have said reduce harm. I understand that, but when it comes to the specific part about public benefits by saving this important historic farm group, would you like to elaborate on that a little and explain what those public benefits are?
Thank you, Councillor. If I could just defer to our heritage consultant on that, Councillor Foster, because Mel Morris is going to speak after me, and Mel will set out the whole argument around public benefits and preservation of the building group. I would just like to stress, with reference to the enabling argument, again, Mel will talk to you about that. It isn't a requirement in this instance to go through that exercise. We did specify to the case officer and planning in general that we would be happy to submit a viability report in support of the application. It wasn't felt to be necessary, nor was it a requirement for validation in this instance. But I would like to defer to Mel. Mel Morris will provide the sort of the expertise I think you're looking for in order to answer that question with reference public benefits. Would that be okay?
I appreciate that, and I'll wait for the heritage expert. But you know, you did mention the impact on the green belt, so that's why the question was relating to that. Yeah.
Yes, the impact on the green belt in landscape terms is not felt to be anything other than beneficial, given the context that we're currently working with, and that's the position we put forward in our case to officers. Now, officers have drawn a different judgment in that regard. We're comfortable with our assessment on it, and we've appointed a landscape expert to evidence that position ahead of putting another application in. Now, in the absence of evidence on the part of the local authority to the contrary, you know, we have an expert that's supporting this position, an independent expert, who has drawn this conclusion that the overall impact isn't harmful. In fact, it is beneficial both in landscape effect terms and in terms of visual impact. So I can't speak for your officers. We have to disagree with them on that point, given our expert evidence.
Thank you for that.
Are there any further questions? No, thank you, Ms. Cowley, and we'll move on to the next speaker, Mel Morris. Mr. Morris, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, you're up there, Michaela. Right, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. With this site, it is important that we don't forget what the baseline position is. The baseline is that we have 20th century development on the west side of the farmstead, part of the 20th century farm, as well as the livery buildings to the southeast. The proposed development lies almost entirely within the conservation area, and the area has been historically developed as part of the farmstead. The Dutch barn is part of the farm. I do not agree, therefore, that the principle of development in this west part of the site is inherently harmful to the character of the conservation area. The existing development around the buildings is harmful to the conservation area in a number of ways, including the fact that it is inappropriate with its use of alien materials, brick and render, concrete blockwork, and its sprawling form, and the fact that it obscures the original appearance of the threshing barn, both to the north and the south. Following the refusal of the previous application, I looked at the design with the architect to address many of the concerns of the committee. The alignment of the 4-bed houses has been set further back on the site. This has made a big difference. The revised scheme for the westernmost building is 2.5 metres further back on the site. And by changing the largest 5-bed dwelling to a 4-bed dwelling, and by removing the garage, we've made a major reduction in the scale of this on the western perimeter of the site at the highest point. We also reduced the scale and eaves height of this and the other dwellings. We were also able to reduce the scale of the 4-bed dwelling by lowering the eaves, floor-to-ceiling heights, maintaining the traditional roof pitch. And we also created a step in the development with a single-storey element, which reveals more of the southern stable in the principal view, and which creates more penetrative views through the western part of the development. We're now using local stone for all of the walls, which will be laid in narrow courses rather than large blocks, in conjunction with stone lintels and sills. The public benefits are that the original farm buildings, which are important historically and make a major contribution to the character of the conservation area, which
30
are
seconds remain.
extremely vulnerable, will be repaired, and our scheme will cross-subsidise this with the conversion of the threshing barn. The removal of the obtrusive development and the changes as a whole reduces the scale of the development, better reveals the cluster, and suppresses heights and creates more steps with a reduction in volume of about 25%. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No? Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor
Chair.
Foster.
Yeah. I naturally hear, Chair, the description of the public benefits.
Yes. So in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework, one of the criteria is that if you identify a level of harm, then a public benefit is to create optimum viable use. So when we're looking at the threshing barn, which is a 17th century, late 17th century building, we're looking at other buildings around the site. I've looked quite carefully at what is the optimum viable use of those and how this scheme can address the public benefit of bringing them back into use. So it's creating a viable use for buildings which are important in the conservation area. That's the primary public benefit. We're securing the future of a group of buildings which would otherwise collapse. They have no economic use as they stand. So they would eventually just collapse over time because there's no incentive for the owner to spend the money on them. So that is the public benefit. Ultimately, you're finding a use for a building which would otherwise have no economic use.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we move on, I'll just ask Alan to remind us all about motions, and then I'll open the floor for debate. Thank you.
Yes, just bear with me, Chair. Yes, just to remind members again that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reason for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by the evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendation fails, or in other words is not passed, that doesn't mean to say that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or another course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. In terms of the timings of the motions, as mentioned before, these should be moved and seconded after the committee has heard and read and discussed the evidence before it. The chair will indicate when this point has been reached and then will invite motions to be put. Members will be reminded of this by the clerk if they wish to move a motion before then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to open the floor for debate. I'm going to lead by saying I am rather disappointed in the proposal that's been put before us, because to me there doesn't seem a great deal of change. But I'm going to keep my mind open until I see. Now, Councillor Armitage, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Liggett have all got their hands up.
Excuse me, Chair, just before you reach that, would you want to give the planning officer, or rather the planning officer and manager, the opportunity to answer any questions?
Most definitely.
Thank you, Chair.
Colin, are you there? Okay. Are there any questions for Colin from the members? Councillor Elliott. You're on mute, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Colin, just a question really. I've listened quite extensively to the heritage lady and the people who live in the land, and I can't see a great deal of difference in the scaling and massing that would change any of my opinion from page 25, where we're saying it's primarily in the green belt and it would cause substantial harm, and it's considered for the MPPFGS2 that it's, when looked at as a whole, it doesn't meet its criteria. Can you just give us a bit of information that's made you change your mind on this? Because I just can't. I can't see it.
Officers, sorry, just to clarify, Councillor Elliott, officers haven't changed their minds in effect, as the you may recall the application was recommended for approval both back in March and June of last year. I think it was deferred at March, and then subsequently it was refused against officer recommendation at the June committee. So in our conclusions in this assessment, we're in effect saying that there are improvements, which I think you refer to, albeit you're suggesting that they're minimal improvements in your opinion. So as regards our professional opinion and the overall officer opinion, that remains largely unchanged in terms of the overall conclusions. But we do consider that this scheme is an improvement on the previously refused scheme by members. But as suggested, that was recommended for approval as well.
I just find it strange that a year or more back, we were sat there. If you looked at the photos, you can see a load of lights in the wall that lead around the drive, and we were discussing how we'd had problems with the lights around the drive. We needed them shrouded because the people who live up there were saying that it was intrusive in the darkness. And now we're looking at a scheme for probably another half a dozen houses and a lot more light pollution.
Yeah, of course, we've had to look at the application on its individual merits, and this is a wider redevelopment of the entire site. So as alluded to previously, there are benefits that we've identified and our heritage consultant has identified as outweighing the harm, certainly in heritage terms, and we've identified that would represent very special circumstances in the green belt. So I'd probably have to suggest that we'd have to look at this application obviously on its merits. I understand the point you're making about sensitive lighting in this locality and that in isolation, but of course we need to look at this scheme in its entirety, and that's what we've endeavoured to do.
Yeah, the only reason I bring that one up, Colin, is because I saw the picture and the wall and the lights that were still there, and it just made me smile thinking we're thinking about putting half a dozen new houses up, when only a year or so ago we were discussing that those lights should be shrouded because they were a light pollutant. It's just unbelievable to me. But thanks very much for your answer, Colin.
You're welcome.
Are there any further questions? Thank you, Colin. Okay, I will open the floor now for debate. Councillor Liggett.
Sorry about that problem. I'm in complete agreement with Councillor Elliott and all the objectors. I cannot understand, like you say, there's very little change. 8.15 states that it's a very valuable historic group of farm buildings, and I cannot understand how it can be beneficial to have modern houses put in between historic farm buildings and be beneficial to a conservation area. I'm also very concerned about the footpath situation, as we have something extremely similar, in fact virtually the same, in our own village, where a farm building was sold to be changed into housing, which it has been, and the new resident is really causing us an awful lot of problems with the footpath, refusing to let people through, etc. And we've had Patrick Mountain from County Council onto it since March last year, so it's a year. So I would please consider that, because it will happen. There will be problems. Afraid if you get people living there, they are not going to want people walking past their houses. So I'm very concerned about that as well. But I do believe that this goes against policy BE11, to preserve and enhance the character of the conservation area. I just don't understand how this can possibly do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster?
I think there might have been others before me, but I'm happy to go. Yep. Okay. Thanks, Chair. Yep. For me, the only changes I can see in this from the one we had last year is the scale and massing. And when we look at the 3 reasons we knocked it back, we refused permission last year. Those 3 reasons we've got on page 25. The scale and massing are only mentioned in 2 and 3. So for me, they still stand. There is a very slight change, but it's still substantial. It's not mentioned in the first reason, the scale and massing. There, that talks about the openness in the green belt and the inappropriate development. We've still got this classed as inappropriate development, and although the officers have stated that there's reduced harm, that harm is still substantial, and that's in my view. I know it's not the view of the applicant and the agent, but there is still a reduced harm, and it is still a substantial harm. When we go on then to the reasons we refused it, and in that first part, it talks about the very special circumstances that are needed to outweigh the harm. Now, it's still my view that that's not there. The public benefits by saving this important historic farm group, they're still not met in my view. So that first one still stands. And as for the others, 2 and 3, the reasons we gave, they still stand as well. Without going through all the policies, because they're all there listed in front of us, it's still substantial harm, albeit reduced. So all those 3 reasons for refusing that stood last year still stand today, in my view. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think Councillor Foster has sort of underlined everything which I consider about this site. We turned it down last time. There's very little difference. I mean, how can we justify 4 new dwellings in the green belt? You know, it will cause substantial harm. It doesn't matter how you try and dress it up, make it slightly smaller, make it a bit taller and all the rest of it. It is substantial harm, and it goes against GS2. As regarding it's in the shadow, it's in a conservation area as well, and this should be you know, looked after. And it's harm to the local public and the amenity value. I cannot see, quite frankly, how putting 4 new houses up is going to increase the amenity value of the rest of the site. Yes, I can see that these older buildings can be converted and they should be preserved, but not putting all these new ones in. The older buildings were there before the green belt was even thought about, so they won't cause much harm, even if they are converted. But as it stands at the moment, this this application is basically the same as we had before, and I'll come to the same conclusion.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman?
Yes, Chair. I agree with Councillor Armitage, actually. I think had this come to council, to the planning committee, and said we want to convert the existing historic buildings, you know, they looked at exactly how they did on those pictures, to be honest, I would be absolutely supporting this. I think trying to restore those buildings and then build 4 brand new, spanking new houses next to them, I think it just detracts away from the reason you're actually trying to save the historic ones in the first place. So as far as I'm concerned, based on the reasons that Councillor Foster was listing out earlier, I think it's a no from me.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments? Councillor Barry?
I think most people have actually said it. Nothing's really changed from the planning application that came in last year. To say that this is going to enhance it and be better for the public is a farce, because putting those brand new buildings up, which are going to stand higher than the lane, they're going to stick out like a sore thumb for anybody that's coming anywhere near there, let alone coming up from the upper side, up the footpath. So I don't see how they can say it's for the public benefit. I mean, to me, this is just an economic benefit for the person that owns the land that wants to get as most out of it as he can do. And the properties that are there, renovate the old ones. You know, there's enough there for you to do and to make properties viable. And we all know, even if you can't do them all, that as we walk through our countryside, we see lots of dilapidated stone barns that have been left, and they become part of the feature of our landscape within the green belt. So let's not think that brand new and smart looking things are everything that needs to be in the green belt. We need to be preserving what we've got. And the properties that are proposed here are not suitable in exactly the same way as they weren't suitable when it came before us in the first place. So I think, you know, I think everybody here has had that discussion with themselves about whether anything's changed or not. Nothing's changed. It's still an eyesore in the green belt. So I just think that, you know, I mean, for me, I think we need to move to the vote or to whatever, but I would definitely recommend going against officers' recommendation.
Thank you. If there's no other comment, I'll ask, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when I'm looking at the reasons we refused it for last time, I can't think if I were to put a motion to refuse this, I can't think how I would change this. And I'd ask other members of the committee to look at those reasons and see what more we could add to that to make this clear. Because we were asked last time to give our opinion on this. We were asked to consider if the special circumstances had been met, and we said they hadn't, and it's come back again. So I'd like to make this clear to officers exactly where we stand here as a committee. So I'd like our officers to listen to this as well as the agents on our opinion. And I'm wondering if we can add anything in this. So I'd like to put that to other members. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shipp, Councillor Elliott.
Oh, Chair, sorry. Thank you, Chair. Go on, Ross, you're all right, carry on.
I was just going to say, actually, I think we need to object on the things that we are really bothered about here, rather than trying to list as many things as we possibly can get on there to go, you know. I think if we just stick to the stuff that we see as a problem with this, which to me is the fact that we are building in the green belt with new houses. So is that SS10? SS9?
I've got a few for you, Ross, if you need.
Yeah, I was going to say, because then that message is clear. We're happy for them to be renovated. I assume we all are on that same wavelength. But it's the fact that we're building new houses in the greenbelt, which to me is the sticking point.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I think my colleagues have said exactly what's right already. And yes, Mark's right. It is a long list. The reason it was a long list last time is because they were all the relevant policies that the application is pertaining to. GS2 of the local plan, GS1, GS6, H12, BE11. We could carry on. They're all the relevant things that our officers need to understand. Us as a committee don't like. It's basically, you know, the agents and that are going to call it up and say there's no harm to the green belt. Of course they are. But for me, sticking all those brand new buildings there on that really stand up on the edge of that lane, on the edge of the bridleway overlooking the valley, of course they're going to be prominent, and of course they're going to, for me, infringing the green belt and the openness of the green belt. So all those policies that are there are still relevant.
Thank you. Councillor Armitage.
I think it was pointed out last time that, and also when we go against officers' recommendation with the various reasons, it's always, Adrian has always advocated that we use the strongest ones. And I think, with all due respect to Mark, on page 25, 1, 2 and 3 are the strongest ones. and we should stick with them.
Councillor Barry?
Yeah, I think, when I said about voting against officers' recommendations, it is to stick with those things that we had in the first place, because they are the strongest arguments that we've got. And I think they are still extremely relevant now. Nothing's changed enough from those three to make me feel any different about this application. So, like I said, I still go against officers' recommendations, carrying forward with exactly what we had before.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments at this point? Richard?
Yes, thank you. Clearly there's a very strong overall view from members that in their minds nothing has changed. And I think that because that is the view, then just to really agree with one or two of the members, what they said there, then I'd agree that if nothing has changed, then in their minds, then nothing should change in the reasons for refusal either. And I think looking wider afield and starting to introduce other things would only just lead into difficulties and potentially undermining the strength that you feel there is in those previous reasons for refusal.
Thank you. Everybody finished? Yep. Alan, would you just like to run through moving a motion?
Well, we've just done that, Chair. And what I would suggest now, you do move to the point where we actually get a motion sort of before us. As things stand, you've yet to open, so I'm assuming you're opening it the floor for that now.
Yes, thank you. We've heard everything we're going to hear today, and regarding recommendations, etc. I'm now opening the floor for a motion.
Chair, I'll quite happily move a recommendation that we go against officer recommendation for the same reasons I said earlier. Everything in 5.2 and the things listed on the 3 points above it on page 25. So GS1, GS6, H12, BE11, and the whole list. I think even Richard has just said the right thing. It's what we thought last time, and nothing's significantly changed to change our minds. So why would we change our minds on the things we got last time round?
I'll second.
It's okay. We've got a seconder here, Councillor Barry.
Yeah, I was going to second that motion.
Okay.
Keeping it as it was, as strong as it was in the first place.
Okay.
So essentially then, Chair, is it to go against officer recommendations for the reasons originally used by the committee when it actually turned down the original application earlier in the year?
Yes.
Is that the essence of it, members?
Yeah.
That's it for me, Alan, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move to the vote.
Members, it's clearly say for, against or abstain to go against the application. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Barry.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Mark Foster.
For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader.
For.
Councillor Rouse.
For.
Councillor Ruff.
For.
And Councillor Shipman.
For.
Chair, with 12 votes for, 0 against, 0 abstentions, that motion was carried.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll move on to the next item of the agenda. That's the planning appeals lodged undetermined. Richard, are you going to lead on this?
I think we just move and note them, don't we, Chair?
Unless there's anything Richard wants to say. Richard, can you hear us? You're on mute, Richard.
Yep, I can hear you. I'm just picking up the agenda to see if there's anything really that needs to be mentioned about it. I mean, you can see what there has been submitted. I mean, there is a date already set for the informal hearing in relation to the first refusal of, it's not on there, it's already been through the system, I think, for Cartledge Lane, which is 18th of May. So the the first scheme will be considered at an informal hearing then. Whether the applicants ask the inspector to consider the amendments that are considered today, or whether they go full out for the main for the first proposal remains to be seen. But I've got no other. I mean, clearly there's new appeals in there which are for your information. The only two decisions that we've had are there. One which committee refused, or both of which committee refused. They seem to have gone through the system fairly quickly because they're fairly recent ones. But I've got nothing more to add on any of them. It's really just there for your information.
Thank you. So we'll just make those as noted. Thank you. I have no matters of urgency. So thank you all for your attendance this afternoon and have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers.